Yeah, so no, all the technical obstacles are overcome. We proceed with our panel discussion embedded in the GeoERA final event. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, and especially dear panelists, welcome to our panel discussion. I'm glad to introduce the panelists. It is Mr. Geoff Plumley, Chief Scientist of the US Geological Survey, Mr. Scott Foster, Director for Sustainable Energy at the UNECE based in Geneva, Mrs. Laura Burke, Director of the Irish Environmental Protection Agency and Chair of the Management Board of the European Environmental Agency, and Mrs. Maria Vasilako, Mission Board of Climate Neutral Cities. Thank you, panelists, for joining us here and for giving us your view from your perspective on the GeoERA, its results that we have presented that morning in various sessions, the achievements, and in the end, we'll have a look forward into the future because GeoERA is one stepstone in bringing together European geological expertise. It is far, far away from the end, and we'll have to keep track in the future. So as a first panelist, I ask Geoff Plumley for his opinion statement. Geoff, please.
Thanks. It would have helped if I'd unmuted myself. Thanks again. I'm honored. Thanks to the conference organizers for inviting the USGS to participate in this GeoERA concluding conference. I also want to pass along to you the regards of our acting director, Dr. David Applegate, and emphasize how much we in the USGS value our ongoing dialogues and collaborations with our counterpart geological surveys across Europe. Like me, Dave is a great believer in the absolutely essential role of geological surveys in providing many different types of earth science information to support policymaking and to inform the public, the private sector, and many other stakeholders. We're also cognizant of and appreciate how the many geological surveys around the world can differ from one another in their mandates and the specific roles that they play within their respective governments, which is why multinational collaborations such as GeoERA are so important and so challenging, and yet why GeoERA's accomplishments that I've seen are so notable. I regret that the difference in time zones precluded me from being able to listen in to what I'm sure were many excellent presentations in the previous session, but I was able to spend some very enjoyable time looking through the GeoERA website and the background materials provided by the organizers. And I'm truly impressed by the array of project activities that have been accomplished as part of the GeoERA effort. I also have to say how much I really enjoyed the really creative and yet descriptive names you were all able to come up with for all of these different activities. So a little bit more examples of geoscience contributing to key societal issues. I want a little bit of background about the USGS. We're a non-regulatory, non-advocacy science organization that we feel is unique across the federal government in the United States and among geological surveys worldwide. We're truly transdisciplinary with scientists from many geological, hydrological, biological, and physical science disciplines and technology disciplines as well. And we collaborate with even more disciplines outside the USGS, such as engineering, public health, medicine, and economics. We provide scientific data, monitoring, targeted research, and modeling on an increasingly broad range of societally important topics to inform policy and decision-making. In addition to policy makers at local, state, and federal levels, our science informs a wide range of additional stakeholders such as the private sector, non-governmental organizations, academia, and the public. Our science is arranged around 5 theme-based mission areas, including energy and mineral resources, natural hazards, water, ecosystems, and core science systems. We also work extensively across our mission areas on a variety of topics requiring an integrated science approach. Understanding the implications of climate change is one such example, and it also illustrates beautifully the absolutely foundational role that the geosciences play in helping understand and address complex problems facing societies worldwide, problems that increasingly require a truly transdisciplinary approach to solve. For example, at the USGS, we've used knowledge gleaned from our oil and gas assessments to help assess the potential for greenhouse gas emissions from federal lands across the US. Geoscientists work to understand potential for geologic carbon sequestration across the landscape, and also help inform work done by our biologists on biological carbon sequestration and blue carbon sequestration in the freshwater and marine environment along our coasts. We work to understand coastal change hazards such as coastal erosion, storm overwash, and related topics, and help enhance the resilience related to the increased severity of coastal storms, sea level rise, and loss of Arctic sea ice. We work to understand the impacts of future climate change on ground and surface water quality across the country, and the implications of such changes for water management, policymaking, and decision-making. Our ecologists do a lot of work understanding the ecological impacts of climate change on biodiversity, animal migration, invasive species, and other topics. And geoscientists can provide surprisingly important insights into the role of geology on the locations and distribution of climate refugia that are a function of soil mineralogy, or locations where geologic structures feed cool groundwater into warming streams. Economic geologists and mineral commodity experts provide insights into the anticipated demand for and geologic sources of the critical minerals needed to support a sustainable low-carbon energy future. We assess for potential for geothermal energy and wind energy using methods developed for traditional oil and gas assessments. Our environmental geochemists can work with wildlife health specialists and external collaborators in public health to help monitor and understand how changing patterns in vector-borne zoonotic diseases and the types and persistence of environmental contaminants and pathogens may affect wildlife and human health. And our scientists are also embracing the opportunities to work with social scientists to see how our transdisciplinary climate science can help address climate equity and environmental justice issues. So these are just a few examples of how geosciences can inform policymaking as part of a much broader transdisciplinary approach. I was impressed to see such a broad range of GeoERA project activities on a similarly broad variety of topics, many of which are parallel to the types of activities that we carry out. I'm confident that the GeoERA work will similarly provide the scientific foundation to inform policymaking that will benefit all countries across Europe, and that will indeed serve as the geologic or geoscience foundational basis for truly transdisciplinary work. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Scott. I propose that we go through the opening statements and then pick the issues up in the discussion. So as a next panelist, I ask Scott Foster for his statement.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for Geosurveys for inviting ECE to join this panel. We've heard actually a lot this morning already, a number of speakers referring to UNFC and to UNRMS, and we're really pleased with our collaboration with all of our partners in the development, its deployment in Europe. In fact, a number of the GeoERA deliverables are going to be published as documents at our next meeting of the expert group on resource management. That meeting is going to take place in Geneva, knock on wood that COVID permits, in April of 2022. So I hope you all would be able to join us. Those deliverables include some specific case studies on aggregates for Austria, rare earth elements for Sweden, and possibly graphite for Norway. So our overall reaction to what we've seen in terms of the documentation is very positive. We're keen on the collaboration that we've had, and we see a strong basis for moving forward. The raw materials part of the Geological Service for Europe emphasizes very strongly both UNFC and UNRMS. And then we see this center of excellence, these international center of excellence on sustainable resource management for the deployment of those systems. We do anticipate the extension to energy and water resources in the future of the Geological Survey of Europe. There are a couple of observations I'd like to make. There's this network of practitioners that's being set up. That's part of the EU project that's funded. And it depends a lot on experts from Euro Geo Surveys. Once you get that center of excellence set up, that network will be then transferred into it. And ECE, we have our own networks of centers of excellence, and we expect a very, very close collaboration. There are a number of things that are going on right now. We've got the collaboration with the European Commission on critical raw materials. We've got this project on the development and implementation of UNFC and UNRMS. That's really important. We've got an ongoing collaboration with the G7 and the UK on the issue of critical raw materials. And then we're also working with the Secretary General in New York. He's setting up a working group on the extractive industries. All of these efforts point towards some common objectives. We're talking about security of supply, that concentrates the attention. We're talking about sustainable development. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about social justice. These are all important elements that we find in the documentation. There's recognized huge value in having a common vocabulary and common principles. Every country's got its own endowment of natural resources, and there are going to be differences. But having that common framework we consider is hugely important. So it's not just within Europe, it's actually across the globe that we're finding a lot of enthusiasm, very strong engagement for the UN approach on sustainable resource management. And I heard it in one of the breakout sessions. Society is not going to progress without resources, so leaving it in the ground isn't an option. What's needed is some sort of comprehensive framework for responsible resource management that's designed to benefit communities worldwide, and it's supposed to provide assurances to the investment community who are calling for tightened environmental, social, and corporate governance, ESG. So we're pushing for a 5-point plan that covers this, and we see that the collaboration with GeoERA Surveys is critical on this. The first is a socioeconomic environmental contract that we've got to develop so that when you're doing the extractive work, you're benefiting those local communities. There's a need for common sustainable finance principles. That includes a sustainable finance taxonomy, and we've seen that this morning. There's a need for comprehensive resource management framework, that's UNFC and UNRMS. We're going to need mechanisms to ensure transparency, traceability, and sustainability. That'll be critical. And then the fifth one is strategic environmental assessments. So at the UN, we really appreciate the support and the engagement of this community, which is driving resource management to sustainable outcomes. We think we have a strong basis for collaboration going forward. We can be talking about hydrogen, we can talk about the things that go into batteries, we can set up these centers of excellence across Europe. That's very important. I think the final comment I can make is our expert group on resource management. We're very keen in providing any kind of national capacity or training the trainers types of events as might be requested. So I think in a nutshell, we would say we very strongly support what we've seen in the documentation, and we look forward to the collaboration going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott, especially for the appreciation. We will come back to that point later. As a third panelist, I ask Laura Burke for her statement.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today. And I suppose I'm very conscious that I'm coming from an environmental protection and environmental assessment background from both the Irish Environmental Protection Agency, but also as the chair of the management board of the European Environment Agency. The first thing I'd say is I think there's so many synergies between what we're doing and certainly the work I heard this morning. Ruud earlier was talking about sound, solid information and the risk of when things are out of sight, they're out of mind. I think that goes for environmental pressures as much as the geological side of things. And also he was talking about, this independence and having good independent information, which again, whether it be my agency or the European Environment Agency, it's all about what we do. And ultimately, it's about good data supporting good decision making. So for me, this morning, it's around linking the importance that the Geological Information Services can play with the European Green Deal. Tackling the ambitious objectives of the European Green Deal, and because we're going to need integration across disciplines if we're going to have success in the EGD. It's around increasing climate ambition, supplying clean, affordable and secure energy, and of course the clean and circular economy, and already talking about minerals recovery this morning, secondary raw materials, for example. And back in 2015, there was an EEA seminar on the use of the geological underground and developing the knowledge base on socioeconomic, environmental and health impacts. That seminar discussed a wide range of issues, all of which I think are still relevant 7 years later. It was around extraction of finite resources, for example, oil and gas. It was extraction of renewable resources, for example, drinking water or geothermal energy. And again, these topics are being discussed by GeoERA and I know investigated. And of course, storage, whether that be carbon capture and storage, or what was addressed by the EEA was nuclear waste, which is something that I haven't heard this morning, even with the discussion that we're having on nuclear energy and the role it can or cannot play in future energy systems. And the EEA identified through the seminar that underground services are sometimes poorly understood and rarely assessed, including the benefits and trade-offs. And what we were saying was a more integrated knowledge base is required, specifically on health and environmental hazards. And again, this was raised this morning, but we need to be upfront and identify these, the impacts and risks of technologies and operations, because they aren't without risk, again, as we know, and I think Ruud was talking about that this morning, and then the socio-economic and the societal impacts when this happens. Governance and legal aspects of regulating the underground. How do we address the mismatch between the administrative and geological boundaries? Because geology, as many people have already said, doesn't understand those administrative boundaries. How do we address the economics and detecting weak signals of early warnings? It was identified that more data and better access to data on the underground use and impacts is required to support the decision-making process. So in that, really welcome the work of GeoERA. We also need to identify synergies and multiple uses and looking where there can be these benefits. And one I'd really like to call out, because I think we're seeing across Europe and I'm also seeing in Ireland, is addressing issues of social acceptance. And I think this is a really, really big issue that has to be at the forefront of everybody's minds. Peter and Ruud had highlighted this about reassurance to the public to do things responsibly. And I think there is a lot of skepticism amongst the public. There's been bad experiences and there's a lot of resistance. And again, I'll give the example of fracking in Ireland, huge amount of resistance to the extent that the social license to operate was just not there. And so it wasn't developed further. And we're also seeing that debate across Europe on carbon capture and storage. So just because something is technically able to be done doesn't mean it will be done because of these issues. So I would really like to highlight that. And then the last thing I was just going to highlight in a positive and moving to the more positive is a very new initiative where Europe is collaborating with national organizations, both public and private, to monitor ground motion at European scale as part of Copernicus land monitoring services. And I'm saying this because the European Environment Agency is implementing this with the INET, the national bodies. And this Already Earth observations have been mentioned this morning, but this will be the first ever comprehensive, free and open European data set. It's going to be released in Q2 2022, so this year, and it will be used in combination with other biophysical and socioeconomic data to address issues related to subsidence in cities due to infrastructure works or groundwater extraction, coastal erosion, landslides, etc. And I think this is a really exciting development in that context of Earth observations and linking to climate and all of these things we were talking about. So just wanted to highlight that, and that more information, of course, is available on that on Copernicus. So I'll leave it at that, Ralph, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Maria Vasilakou, representing climate neutral cities. And I'm curious on your input because in the sessions today, we have seen pan-European maps, and cities are at first sight simply spots on that maps. And on the other hand, we have seen that 75% of the European population lives in the cities. So Maria, welcome.
Thanks for the turn. Hello, everybody. And yes, indeed. I mean, cities is where more than, well, already the majority of the population of the Earth live, and they account also for the majority of carbon dioxide emissions. So clearly, cities is where we have to tackle the challenge to move towards climate neutrality. Now, I have some comments and thoughts I'd like to share with you, not only from the perspective of a member of the mission board of the EU Mission Board on Climate Neutral Cities, but also as a practitioner, as a former vice mayor of Vienna, in my case, responsible for climate protection and urban planning. And the first thought I had, when I looked into the results of the project is that, well, cities, if they have geology and geography departments, most of them don't, but if they have them, these are not exactly the fanciest departments. In terms of, for politicians, it's not a type of projects and solutions being applied there that will appeal publicly, unless something happens. And at the moment that something goes wrong, especially some kind of hazard occurs, this is when everybody suddenly realizes how extremely important and how crucial they are, for administration and for policies. I think that they're getting even more important now, and everybody starts realizing in the face of future climate ambitions. And it has been addressed often today. I would like once again to stress that geology is crucial when it comes to achieving climate neutral cities, climate mitigation, climate adaptation. It's crucial from an urban perspective when it comes to hazard prevention. It's crucial when it comes to water management, especially groundwater and drinking water. And last but not least, which is extremely important for cities, when it comes to geothermy. Because a very practical challenge that we're facing right now is actually transforming our city, or our district heating and cooling systems, and moving towards renewable directions and new solutions and away from, in many cases, district heating plants that were based on fossil solutions. Now, I would like to share perhaps 3 examples from my own experience from my time once again as an executive city councillor for planning and climate transformation. I would say one very important issue is hill slides. So in many cities, we're facing problems with editing permissions, issuing permissions for housing, or in most cases, even informal housing on hills, and being faced with the dilemma, do I issue a permit afterwards, or what do I do actually in such cases when the hill is moving? And this is something where we suddenly all realize how important this is. Perhaps a second example is, again, I already mentioned it, geothermy and deep drilling. Because, of course, we all know that the reserves are not exploited by far, but deep drilling is connected to several issues. And from a perspective of a city, it is also connected to the risk of financing, let's say, an adventure that may then in the end up in a failure. And although we all know that we have to experiment and we have to be innovative, on the other hand, you always have controlling departments that will come and you will have to explain why you embarked in something risky. So in a sense, having data, sharing know-how, connecting this and producing a shared knowledge basis is extremely important, and maybe also the basis for joint ventures between cities in this respect. And then perhaps one last example has to do with the idea of sponge city, decementation, and uncovering, let's say, water that is flowing underground, which is extremely important for cities in terms of placemaking and climate adaptation, tree planting, avoiding heat, or repairing heat islands. And it is something that has to do with our day-to-day business all the time. So let me conclude by also saying it is clear how cities can benefit from this project, and it's clear how we can use the data, because the entire idea of 100 climate neutral cities by 2030 is also exchanging know-how and data and knowledge and working together in order to move in this direction. But upon thinking, I came up also with something that cities can contribute as well themselves to such a project. And this is also data. And just one last example, right now in the city of Vienna does drilling in order to create a new metro line. So I'm sure that the data that we obtain there could be valuable. Perhaps we can actually look into such large infrastructure projects also as an opportunity to work together and look specifically for data that may be needed for such pan-European projects. So that was my comments on this, and I look very much forward to using the results on cities' day-to-day business.
Thank you very much, Maria. I want to introduce or to give the information that the keynote speakers are also foreseen for that panel discussion. I can see Gerardo Herrera replacing Peter Handley, who had to leave for unforeseen personal circumstances. I've seen that Ruzzino is trying to come in. And let me start with a couple of questions. I would like to touch first GeoERA as a project, and then some key points that came out of your statements. And this is, in my understanding, it is awareness for the subsurface. It is communication, especially to the citizens, because and that was mentioned that is several times. We live in a free and an open in a democratic society, and we have citizen rights and to respect citizen rights. So what we call the social license to operate becomes more and more important. In Europe, we face the challenge that every nation has its own geological survey, and they have their own history. So after 100 to 150 years of running geological surveys, we end up in a great diversity. And the challenge is to bring things together: data, information, methods, technologies, evaluation, appraisal, monitoring. And this is also the case in other parts of the world. So there are similar organizations like EGS, for example, in Asia, the CCOP, in Africa, in South America. And of course, there's a cooperation in the Northern Americas. And I would like to ask Scott Foster, because I assume that you are the addressee for the global point of view. Do you consider GeoERA as a front-runner program under comparable geological initiatives elsewhere?
Thank you for the question, and certainly I find this whole project and the program is an example for others to copy. We've been working with the EGRM, Expert Group on Resource Management, for very many years in terms of trying to progress a global system. And even a global system isn't going to be down to the detail of what template, what format, etc., because there are the differences to which you've referred. We wouldn't be able to make the progress that we have made without the support of the European Geological Surveys. So at a national level, and the contributions that have been made, and now as a collective is emerging, that discussion, that process has been hugely valuable to us. So I would say yes, a leader, but I do note that other countries are grappling with similar challenges. Challenges in terms of circularity, as we just heard, challenges in terms of sustainability and the rest of it. So what we're trying to achieve at ECE is a recognition that different regions, different countries have their own particularities, but we want some of those fundamental principles to be made more common. Specifically on the social license to operate, the social, environmental, economic license to operate. Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the challenges that local communities face, they're going to be at different stages. But that doesn't change the idea of an engagement with the local communities to be able to say, here are the benefits you're going to get, and here's how we're going to address and accommodate your concerns. So I guess on the one hand, yes, leader, but on the other hand, facing some challenges that others are facing as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I would like to ask Geoff Plumley, what's your recommendation in terms of communication to the citizens?
Well, that's an excellent question, and that's something that the USGS has been working hard on over a number of years, on how we can always improve how we initiate our science, how we carry it out, and then how we communicate it. And this is, again, one of the key places where our collaborations with social scientists, both with a small cadre within the USGS and then a number of social scientists outside the USGS, is really helping us understand how we can better do it. And one of the concepts that we're really embracing is the idea of co-production of our science, meaning we engage the communities that are most impacted by particular earth science or resource or climate issues. And we engage them from the beginning in the process and understand their needs, and then engage them throughout the process, and then work with them to help communicate. And helping communicate in a risk-based framework is also very key. And how can we actually communicate in a way that is very effective to communities that may not have the same, who likely don't have the same detailed understanding of the science. So figuring out how we can better communicate our science in a non-technical way. So that's something that we are embracing wholeheartedly and always trying to do a much better job on, and working with the social scientists, the risk communication specialists, and others is a really absolutely fundamental part of that work.
Thank you very much. In the morning sessions, we have seen projects on groundwater. Superficial groundwater is strongly related to soil sciences, to groundwater recharge. And from my professional background, I am a hydrogeologist. I know that this is a very strong interface to the environmental protecting agencies and their mandate. I want to ask Laura Berg, groundwater and soil and the interface between Geological Survey Organizations and EPAs. Is it competition or cooperation? And if it's competition, what's the way to cooperation?
I would hope it's not competition. I always think there's so much work that has to be done. Let us not all get territorial, excuse the pun in this context, that how do we each add value? And again, this is why I was highlighting at the beginning in the context of the European Green Deal, we need integration across all of the disciplines. If you look at environmental agencies, and I'll look to my own Environmental Protection Agency, in our assessments with regard to some of our regulatory activities, but other activities, we absolutely rely on the Geological Survey of Ireland with regard to groundwater vulnerability. There is no point duplicating effort or trying to duplicate expertise. So I think each organisation, either nationally or internationally, need to be clear on what's their role and mandate. To do that really well, to focus on what we're meant to do really, really well, and then look and see where we can work with and through others. And again, the mandate for my organisation is very much around working with and through others, and recognising that there's expertise elsewhere that we should and could bring in. And groundwater is such a topical issue. And I was interested this morning hearing about the GeoERA and the quality, the quantity, vulnerability, and climate change. And again, when Scott was talking about the hierarchy of needs, water is such a basic at having good water quality. We assume that you can have good drinking water quality. That is not an assumption I think that any of us should make, whether that be in the more developed countries or in developing countries. So I think there's an onus on working together, and in the context of how, Ralph, I think a lot of that is recognizing where each of our expertise lies and looking at what's the outcome we want to achieve. Because if you focus on the outcome, then you bring in the relevant players to work together.
Thank you very much. So fortunately, we can see Ricino now.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah. My question for you is, did GeoERA emphasize the importance of geology and make it more visible in society?
It impact, but it has an indirect impact on how society perceives the message. What it has done, the cooperation in GeoERA, is it urged our Geological Survey in the Netherlands, it urged it on to try new things, to invest, to share practices, but also to think more in an integrated way. It also looked into the quality of groundwater, also look into the needs for the built environment. So it has been a huge impulse for providing better services, more integrated services to government, to other communities, etc. And in doing so, they now are reaching a much bigger audience and a lot more new stakeholders. So that's the impact it has, but it's in an indirect way because the man in the street didn't hear from GeoERA.
I would like to continue with the question to Maria Vasilakou. We have seen that the majority of people live in cities. And there are geological issues for the development of cities. Maria, you touched the major points. So if you want to raise awareness for the subsurface, for the scientists working on that issues, I would say cities are a good starting point. What would you recommend at that point?
Well, I think it has been addressed already by Scott Foster, I think. It has a lot to do with involving communities in projects. So normally we go about these very, let's say, scientific issues and aspects in very secluded meetings. So we consider it to be something extremely complicated that not everybody will understand. And that is the kind of invisible services and working that has to be done in the background so that everything works fine. And I think that it's about time we said goodbye to this approach. And we started explaining exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, and involving once again local communities to be part of this. And what I always find surprising results of this approach is that you may end up with wonderful projects where people become active themselves and start developing their own ideas, even though such a panel, as of now, we might not, turn up with an idea how this could happen. And maybe one last point to this that I personally find the most important. If we are to arrive at climate neutral cities by 2030, 35, 40, we can never arrive without people, without the citizens becoming active. And it's not about participation in a sense. That was yesterday. It's about designing action together, and it's about supporting citizen action. I believe that this is actually the most crucial role that cities will have in terms of a new idea for leadership. So I think raising awareness, once again, to make a long story short, is actually works through whatever action can be designed and implemented together with local communities.
Yeah, thank you. Let me direct the discussion now to the future. What we see, especially in Germany, where I come from, that the so-called baby boomer generation is fading out their professional life. They're going to retire step by step within the next 10 years. And so the question is, how do we organize, how do we qualify the next generation? How do we get their interest for the subsurface? And I would like to ask Geoff Plumley what the USGS is doing with that regard.
Well, that's another good question. And the USGS is very much facing just the situation you described in our scientific workforce as well. The number of geoscientists, hydrologists, geologists has actually decreased substantially over the path of my 30-plus year career with the USGS. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but this is clearly something that is of high importance to us. How can we engage and get people interested in the earth sciences, even in the kindergarten through high school level? And then how can we keep them engaged by taking and pursuing geoscience curricula in the university and in grad school? And then how can we actually follow through and hire them and employ them for a long part of their career? And what we're finding is that there are no easy answers in this, but clearly things like involving the communities early on in our science efforts and getting them engaged, getting them interested in science, seeing how it affects, seeing children, helping it convey to them how science might affect their lives and generating interest in that respect. So it's a whole process that is starting with education at young ages and going all the way up through the careers of the scientists, and how can we make it more attractive and beneficial for people. And it's not just replacing the expertise that we've lost, but also being able to hire as we need the new disciplines that we increasingly need that go beyond earth sciences that will help us accomplish our truly transdisciplinary science to address the very complex problems going forward. So I don't have too many solutions, but it's all baby steps where we're working to try to improve. And we've got programs at the USGS at most of those levels, and we're looking at what we can do to help enhance getting people engaged in science and following through with lifelong careers.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, when in the 1970s, when I myself decided to become a geologist, the magic was oil. After the further oil crisis and all the developments, the exploration during the 1970s, oil was that magic. And it will not be the magic for geoscientists in the future, because we are right in the energy transition. And one country that's pretty right in that transition is the Netherlands. So I would like to ask Ricino, do the new themes, can they develop the attractiveness for young people?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I do think so, because what I see, we get a lot of interest from universities, but also from primary schools in the energy transition, and they ask for contracts, trainees to send to us to help us out in trying to get this energy transition going and reaching the goals we are reaching for. Actually, intrinsically, people are very interested in geology. They become fascinated once they see what's really on the 8 o'clock news in the Netherlands was the fact that there's a volcano lying underneath the surface of the Netherlands. It's not active, but the fact that it's there. So the 8 o'clock news started with this fact. That's really nice to see. And this interest is growing because people realize that we need to use the subsurface for the energy transition. And there's a lot of young people who are really interested in the energy transition as such. And now we have to get them involved also in geology and geography. And I see a lot of opportunities there.
Thank you for your optimism. We'll pick it up. We have in here in the panel discussion also GeoERA Herrera, replacing Peter Handley. And GeoERA, you're very familiar with the Geological Survey Organisations and the GeoERA project. And my question to you is, what did GeoERA with the participants? What was, from your point of view, the achievement with regard to the relation of the participants? And are the relation between the Geological Survey Organisations, are they today different from the start of GeoERA?
Thank you very much for the question. I would like to apologize once again, Peter Handley, due to some personal issues. He couldn't be here with us, and I'm very happy to be here. I come from the Geological Survey. Now I'm in the Commission, in DG GROW, in the Energy Intensive and Raw Materials Unit. And regarding GeoERA, I believe that GeoERA is a central tool now in this geoscience era that we are living in, trying to communicate science to policy making. And before I was in the Geological Survey, now in the Commission, and I realized how important it has been for the raw materials information to be passed to the policymakers, all the projects that have been developed by GeoERA raw materials projects, because we have been able to, let's say, identify, improve the knowledge, the intelligence of the raw materials in Europe, to identify those critical raw material potentially viable projects. Thanks to the UNFC classification, we are also considering the environmental and the social dimension to achieve a sustainable and responsible mine. So I think that GeoERA and the continuation in the CSA is going to be fundamental, is going to be a pillar to pass the raw material information to the policymaking to achieve the Green Deal objectives of the climate neutral transition. And as Laura was saying before, I think we have very important tools to make this responsible and sustainable raw material industry as those of the Earth observation, we can use these tools of the Earth observation to make the mining more sustainable, more responsible, to see how we can better identify the resources, of course, with the Earth observation, but also monitor and track their impact in the environment, and to show the citizens, the population, that it can do in a more sustainable and responsible way. And also in this case, as Scott was saying before, it's very important, the UNFC classification system, because it's considering the environmental axis and the social axis in every evaluation and monitoring of each project. So maybe I was speaking a lot, but I think that GeoERA, your work, has been excellent, has been fundamental to make all the policy-making developments that have been done from the Commission to try to achieve the Green Deal goals. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerardo. If we have a look on the various actors in the geoscience business, we have the Geological Surveys, but there are also consultants, universities, pure research organizations, and of course, industry. And I would like to ask Laura Burke, from your point of view, what are the strengths of geological survey organizations, and what is to do to bring that power to the road?
And as you say, Ralph, there's lots of different players in this space, and of course, everybody comes with their own perspective and with their own agenda. So when you're looking at geological survey, for me, the key is around that independence and the sound, solid evidence. And that's what it will keep coming back to, because when you're making decisions, you know, it's unbiased. It is science, and the science is supporting the decision making. And that's why, and again, I was taken by what Ruud was saying, because I think this doesn't only just apply to geological, but I suppose to all public sector organizations, is staying attuned to societal needs. So there's no point, whether it's an environment agency or a geological survey, looking behind. And I suppose traditionally, you know, in the context of geological survey, the outsider would perceive it's about digging resources up. That's very clearly no longer the case. And that's why I was talking about the link to the Green Deal. So it's so important that the geological survey, with that independent, sound, scientific advice, stays relevant and attuned to what's coming down the tracks. Because otherwise, other players who mightn't have that independence will be influencing decision making. So it is, to me, it's all about the science. Now, what I would say, and I know that I think Jeff was talking about it, and probably Scott as well, is translating that science into something that's relevant and understandable, whether that be to policymakers or to the public. So it is not just we do the science and leave us alone, is making that science understandable, including to different disciplines. So, you know, a scientist or a geologist talking to an engineer, talking to a social scientist, you know, we all have to understand that just because we're familiar with a particular way of working doesn't mean others are. So it's sound science, and then translation that science. That's what I would be focusing on.
Thank you very much. Last question to the panelists. You've seen GeoERA, you see where we are arrived now, but we will go ahead to have a further development of the Geological Service for Europe. EGS members are committed, the next steps are taken, but it's a long way to go. And I ask you, please give us your advice for the further development of the Geological Service for Europe. What's crucial, if possible, in one sentence? Scott.
I was hoping to follow the others' examples. In terms of the geological surveys and the setting up of a European service, I'd like to come back to this recruitment and staffing thing. An old quote from an old friend that kids today are looking to work for companies that are green, clean, and cool. And the idea that you'd be able to connect where the world is going in terms of electric vehicles and batteries and iPhones and the rest of it, the direct linkage of this geological survey to that future world. I think it's something that needs to be announced from rooftops, and I'm sure you're up to the task. Thank you.
Thank you. Geoff?
I would say, thank you for the question. I would say that looking for any and all opportunities to establish collaborations with disciplines that go well beyond the earth sciences in the different countries to be able to have an impact on and contribute the really needed geoscience component to this transdisciplinary approach to solving problems.
Thank you. Ruud?
I would say two things. First of all, showcase what you can do in a very comprehensible and understandable way, and find yourself a very good ambassador who can point out what the benefits of the new organization are.
And Gerardo?
I would say that it's crucial that you continue your excellent work in the exploration of primary and secondary raw materials with a focus on the critical raw materials. I would say it's important the harmonization effort that you are doing, the display of the data in the EGDI portal, the adoption of the UNFC, and to help us to make the raw materials sector more sustainable and responsible using all the available monitoring tools to measure their activity.
Maria had to leave. So I ask Laura Berg.
Thanks very much, and I'll be very short and sweet. I think it's the link to the Green Deal, and it's the role that Geological Services can play in supporting the implementation of the Green Deal. So whether that's climate, energy, circular economy, but those significant roles.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure to have you here. It was a pleasure to have to take notice of your input, your statements, and to discuss the questions that came up from the audience. Thank you very much. Now we are at the end of our GeoERA final event. Again, a big thank you to all visitors, participants, speakers, panelists, and especially the organizers. And my very special thanks go to the colleagues of the Geological Survey of Belgium. I mean, after 2 years of the pandemic, we got somehow used to hold events like this online, unfortunately. And nevertheless, every time it's a new technical and organizational challenge to manage it, video, audio, direction, to manage it perfectly well. So a big thank you to the colleagues from Brussels. You did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've watched the number of participants in the presentation this morning's. We had in the minerals about 130. 115 participants with groundwater and 150 with geoenergy. So all of that was well balanced with a light favor for geoenergy. I'm proud that we were able to attract more than 400 people to this online seminar. Thank you very much for your participation and for your attention. Thank you very much for your input. See you next time and stay healthy.